My son stole $200,000 from my savings account to buy his father-in-law a Mercedes. Hi. I'm Henry Walker, 63 years old, retired U.S. Navy officer. I spent 32 years at sea, through storms, deployments, and quiet mid-watches where the only sound was the hum of the ship cutting through black water. I've commanded men, navigated chaos, and signed off on million-dollar equipment, but nothing prepared me for seeing my own son's name on a theft report. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound between us. The bank smelled faintly of lemon polish and toner, that sterile mix of money and nerves. Mid-afternoon sunlight slanted through the blinds, striping the tile floor in pale golden shadow. Across the desk, a young man in a navy suit tapped his pen, a nervous rhythm that grated like a dripping faucet. His collar was slightly askew, his tie too tight. "Mr. Walker," he began carefully, eyes flicking to his monitor. "We just wanted to confirm these withdrawals were authorized. 4 separate transactions, all within the last month." I frowned. "Withdrawals? What withdrawals?" He hesitated, the kind of pause sailors give before bad weather. "2 wire transfers," he said, scrolling. $50,000 each, to an account belonging to—" His eyes hesitated on the screen. A Daniel Carter. The name dropped like an anchor. Daniel Carter, my son-in-law. The sound in the room flattened, like the world had been muted. I could still hear faint chatter from the tellers, the shuffle of forms, a printer starting up somewhere behind me. But it all sounded far away. Daniel Carter. My son Evan's father-in-law. The man with diamond cufflinks and a smile that never reached his eyes. A real estate developer with soft hands and loud opinions. The kind of man who bragged about discipline but never served a day in uniform. "That's not possible," I said quietly. "I'd know if my savings were touched." The manager cleared his throat. "The authorization came from your joint online account, sir. Same login credentials. The digital signature matches your son's device." For a moment I just stared at him. Then the words settled. Heavy, suffocating. My son's device. I blinked slowly, my pulse thudding in my temples. I'd spent my life teaching Evan about integrity. How to stand straight, shake a man's hand, own his mistakes. I'd thought that was enough, apparently not. "I need statements," I said. My tone clipped. The same tone I used in command briefings. "Every transaction, immediately." The young man nodded quickly, relief flashing across his face that I wasn't shouting. He turned to the printer, the hum of the machine rising as it spit out pages one after another. I took them from him, still warm. The black ink glistened slightly under the fluorescent light. Line by line, the numbers stared back. 50,000, wire transfer. 50,000, 25,000, 75,000, final line, Mercedes-Benz S-Class. Premier Motors, Glendale. My jaw tightened. My hand clenched around the edge of the page until it creased. $200,000. Gone. No discussion. No request. No permission. My son didn't borrow. He stole. The word echoed in my head. Harsh. Undeniable. The bank manager cleared his throat again. "If you'd like, Captain Walker," he'd noticed the retired Navy pin on my jacket, "we can initiate a fraud investigation. But since the authorization came from a recognized device—" "I understand," I interrupted softly. My voice came out calm, but my pulse was a storm. "I'll handle it." I gathered the papers into a folder I'd brought for something far simpler, a routine address update. The irony made me almost laugh. When I stepped outside, the sunlight hit hard, too bright, too pure. It burned against my face like shame. The parking lot shimmered with heat. A flagpole out front clinked as the wind caught the halyard. The sound used to calm me. Not today. I walked to my car, each step deliberate, boots echoing on the concrete. The papers felt heavy under my arm, heavier than deployment reports, heavier than the commendations I once cared about. I sat in the driver's seat and didn't start the engine. The air smelled faintly of salt, maybe from the sea breeze that still carried this far inland. "For him," I murmured. "For his father-in-law?" The words tasted metallic. Daniel Carter. Polished shoes, imported wine, the kind of man who called me sir in front of others, but old school when I wasn't there. Evan admired him, maybe envied him. I saw it years ago at that barbecue when Daniel handed him a drink and said, You've got your father's backbone, son. Now all you need is my network. Evan had laughed. I hadn't, and now here we were. I picked up the papers again, flipping through the pages. The bank logo at the top blurred for a moment before my eyes steadied. My reflection in the side mirror caught me. Gray hair, lined face. Calm eyes that had once stared down storms at sea. A father who built everything from nothing. Now watching his legacy handed over for a car. Not even his own. But his in-laws, I'd faced mutiny before. Once. Years ago when a crewman lied about a maintenance report. But betrayal at sea was easier. You dealt with it directly. You wrote the report. You enforced discipline. Justice was clean. Family was not. The dashboard clock ticked softly. Too soft for how loud my pulse had become. I'd spent my life teaching my son that honor isn't what people see. It's what you do when no one's watching. Now I was the one watching. The folder rustled as I closed it. Some storms, I thought, don't come from the ocean. They come from home. I was never a wealthy man, but I believed in steady work and quiet integrity. For 38 years I wired homes, repaired circuits, and kept the lights on for people who never knew my name. I liked that kind of invisibility, doing the job right, walking away before the applause or complaint could find me. I was an electrical engineer for the U.S. Navy, then a contractor after retirement. The pay was decent, but what mattered to me was precision. Every connection solid. Every current contained, my wife Laura. Used to say I treated life like a switchboard. Everything connected, every mistake illuminated. She wasn't wrong. She was the opposite of me. Warm, instinctive. The kind who could make a stranger feel like family before the coffee finished brewing. Cancer took her 5 years ago. 42 years together, and her voice still lingers in this house like the faint scent of lavender she used to spray on the pillows. She left behind her Grace, and our son, Evan. Evan was everything good I'd ever wanted to preserve. Bright, quick-minded, sensitive in his own way. When he was little, he'd follow me around with a small notepad, drawing the wires I pulled through the walls. He once said, "Dad, it's like you make the house breathe." That's how he saw the world, alive, mechanical, worth fixing. I thought he'd follow me into engineering. But somewhere between ambition and admiration, something shifted. When Evan met Olivia Carter, everything about his world began to shine. Too brightly, too fast. She was polished, charming, the daughter of Daniel Carter, a man whose business card weighed more than my paycheck. Daniel was the kind of man who smiled with his teeth but never his eyes. His family had beach houses, wine cellars, and friends who laughed a little too loudly when they said, "Money isn't everything." At first, I was proud. Olivia seemed kind, respectful even. I still remember their engagement dinner. The restaurant was the kind of place where water came in glass bottles and no one said the price out loud. Olivia's hand rested on Evan's arm the whole time, and I thought, he's found someone who steadies him. But at the head of the table sat Daniel Carter. Slick hair, gold watch, the kind of handshake that felt rehearsed. "So, Captain Walker," he said, swirling his wine, "Evan tells me you were in the Navy. I admire that discipline. We could use men like you in business," I smiled politely. "Business and war don't run on the same kind of honor, Mr. Carter." He laughed, too loud, too dismissive. "Maybe not, but both need winners." That line stuck with me. Winners. That was his creed. After their wedding, the shift came quietly. Evan began dressing sharper. Suits, pocket squares, even cologne that cost more than my monthly groceries. His speech changed too. Faster, smoother, always selling something. The warmth in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something restless. I told myself it was youth. That marriage changes a man. Laura would have seen through it sooner. She always did. When she passed, I sold our family home. Too many rooms, too many ghosts. I downsized to a small 2-bedroom near the bay. I kept only what mattered, her ring, a box of letters, and the savings we'd built over decades. About $210,000, the total of every deployment bonus, every holiday shift, every dollar I didn't spend when I could have. My plan was simple, a quiet retirement, maybe a small workshop where I could tinker with engines or radios, volunteer at the Veterans Center, spend mornings watching the gulls over the harbor. Evan knew about that money. We'd talked about it once, not long after Laura's funeral. We were sitting on the back porch, the night cool and heavy with salt air. He'd looked at me, eyes softer then, and said, "Dad, one day I'll make sure you never have to touch that money." I smiled. "That's the plan, son." Now that promise rings hollow. The night I found out about the withdrawals, I didn't sleep. The house was too still, the silence heavier than the sea during a storm. I sat at my old desk, papers spread out like evidence in a trial I never agreed to attend. The figures glared up at me, numbers that didn't lie, even if my son had. I pulled out an old photo album, one Laura had made back when people still printed pictures. The pages smelled faintly of dust and pine polish. There was Evan at age 6, grease up to his elbows, grinning over the rusty bicycle I'd found at a garage sale. We spent 2 weekends rebuilding that thing. When it finally rolled down the driveway, his laughter echoed across the street like a victory song. That's the boy I raised, the one who learned how things worked by breaking them open. The one who'd once saved his allowance to buy me a wrench set for Father's Day. I'd thought I raised a builder. Instead, I'd raised someone who learned to take shortcuts. I sat there staring at his smile in that photo, a gap-toothed grin under the brim of my old Navy cap. And something inside me broke cleanly, quietly, not like glass but like a bone that had been cracked for years finally giving way. I thought about calling him right then. But what would I say? Why Evan? Why him? Why my savings? No, I'd spent a lifetime in command. I knew the value of patience. Emotions make noise. Discipline makes strategy, so I made a decision. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't accuse. Not until I had proof. Every number, every name. Every excuse he thought would justify betrayal. The following morning, I began collecting. I drove to the bank again, requested printouts of the IP logs, authorization timestamps, even the digital certificate. The manager hesitated, but old habits die hard. I used my Navy tone, the one that made ensigns stand straighter. By evening, I had a file thick enough to tell a story. And what a story it was. 4 transfers, all timed between 9:45 p.m. and 11:10 p.m., hours when Evan would have been home, Olivia asleep. Each one routed through a second account tied to Daniel Carter's business firm, Carter Holdings LLC. The last transaction listed the memo, vehicle purchase, S-Class Mercedes, Glendale Motors. It wasn't just theft. It was pride wearing someone else's name. That night, I brewed coffee. Too late for caffeine, but I needed the ritual. The mug was chipped on the rim, a gift from Laura. It said, "Steady hands, steady heart." I stared at those words as the steam curled upward. "Steady hands," I murmured. "Steady heart. The truth is, I could forgive mistakes. I'd made my share. But deceit, that's something else. Deceit corrodes what it touches. You can't patch it, can't rewire it. You have to tear it out completely and start again. I thought about the boy with the wrench set, the young man who carried my old compass on his graduation day, and I thought about the man who now thought stealing from his father was an act of loyalty to his wife's family. I don't know when the shift happened, the exact moment he started valuing approval over honor. But somewhere between Daniel Carter's handshakes and Olivia's champagne laughter, I lost him. Or maybe he lost himself. I closed the file, stacked it neatly, and turned off the desk lamp. The room went dark except for the faint blue light of the clock. 2:17 a.m. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered. But behind the fatigue, something new had settled. Not rage, not grief. Something colder. Resolve. Some men wage war on oceans or enemies. Mine, it seemed, would begin at home. A few days later, I invited Evan and Olivia to dinner. They arrived in the Mercedes, polished silver, lowered into my driveway like arrogance on 4 wheels. The engine idled for a moment, then shut off with a soft, expensive sigh. Daniel Carter's logo was on the license plate frame like a signature. Evan hopped out, hair slick, shirt crisp. Olivia glided beside him, laughter practiced, perfume trailing like a flag. "Dad," Evan called as he slung an arm over my shoulder. "What do you think?" A surprise gift for Olivia's father. He's always done so much for us. I smelled leather and new car polish and something floral that made the back of my throat tighten. A $200,000 gift? I said, setting down the serving spoon. The roast beef on the table steamed, rosemary and garlic slicing through the kitchen. But suddenly, I couldn't taste a thing. Olivia laughed like a bell. Daniel's birthday only comes once. Evan insisted. Said he wanted to show gratitude. Evan's smile was bright, practiced. He's helped us so much, Dad. Introductions. Business guidance. It's the right thing. I put the spoon down with slow, careful hands. Hands that had once steadied a deck in a storm, that had signed requisitions and stood at muster in the rain. And how does one afford such gratitude? He shrugged, casual. Investment luck. Some crypto stuff. You wouldn't understand. He said it as if that dismissed it. As if 3 words could close the safe on $200,000. Funny, I said, because my bank seems to understand it very well. For a heartbeat he froze, then forced the smile like a man pulling a uniform back onto his shoulders. What are you saying? I'm saying my retirement account is missing exactly what that car cost. I kept my voice level. Naval years teach you to keep your voice level even when the horizon tilts. Silence fell like a drawn curtain. Olivia's hand found Evan's under the table. She squeezed a nervous punctuation. Evan, you didn't, Olivia started. Dad, stop dramatizing. His voice hardened. I was going to replace it. It's temporary. You forged my authorization. The words left me as simply as a logbook entry. He looked down, then up, anger flaring. I borrowed. You'll get it back. You didn't borrow. I felt the old command cadence rising in me despite myself. You didn't ask. You didn't tell me. You used my login. You used my device signature. That's not borrowing. That's theft. Evan's jaw worked. He stood abruptly, chair scraping. You don't get it. These people, the Carters, they move differently. You can't fight this with theft? I said. With lies? With my life savings? He laughed then, short and bitter. You've never understood what success means. The Carters have connections. This is business, Dad. Business, I echoed. Stealing from your father's savings is business? You'd rather I stay small forever? He stepped closer, face flushed. You think pride pays bills? My hands went to the table, fingers splayed on the wood, feeling the grain like a compass. No, son. I think honor does. Olivia's voice was a high, soft thing. Evan, please. Not at the table. He looked at her, then at me, torn like a man at sea between orders and mutiny. You don't understand what it's like. What it's like? I pushed. To be tempted by a life you never had? I was quieter now, and the quiet cut deeper than shouting. I understand being tempted. I understand wanting better. But you don't take someone else's life to make yours brighter. He slammed his fist on the table. The silverware jumped. You act like I wanted this. Like I enjoyed it, did you? I asked. He looked away. For a moment he looked like the boy who'd rebuilt a rusty bike in the driveway, grease on his knuckles, grin wide. Then the light shifted and the man returned, a man who'd started to measure himself by other people's scales. You stole from me, I said. From what Laura and I saved. From the plan we talked about. You used my trust like it was loose change. He stood up. You're making this a moral lesson when it's about survival. Survival? I felt something inside me. Exhaustion, yes, but also a clarity as sharp as a broken signal lamp. You want to call this survival? You could have talked to me. You could have asked. You could have refused. You chose theft. Olivia excused herself then, a practiced calm. I need to take a call, she said, and slipped from the room, phone to her ear, footsteps soft. Her shoes clicked like a metronome. Evan's anger turned to pleading. Dad, I'll make it right. I swear to God I will. Daniel said it's complicated. He'll help. His voice had the tremor of a man who knows he's out of line but is trying to find the justification that will save him. Daniel will help? I repeated. Daniel will help by buying the silence? By buying a car? Daniel's help comes with strings, Evan. You see that, don't you? Or are strings invisible when they come in a leather wallet? His face faltered. He looked small there, not the man I'd watched march at his commissioning. Not the one who'd once stood under the flag with a grin. Only a man caught between shame and entitlement. You don't understand, he whispered. No, I said. But I understand something else. I understand consequences. He pushed past me and out the back door, voice thick. Fine. Go to the police if you want. The gravel crunched as the Mercedes swallowed the road. Tires squealed, a small private thunder, and then quiet returned like the sea after a wave. Inside the house, the roast had cooled. The clock on the stove ticked in a way that sounded like accusation. I sat down, palms on the table, and didn't move for a long minute. I thought of Laura's hands folding sheets, of the soft click of the kettle on the stove, of the small rituals that had stitched our life together. Those rituals felt sullied now, stitched with an unfamiliar thread. That night I did not call the police. I did not scream. I sat under the weak yellow light of the kitchen bulb and wrote, June 3rd, wire transfer $50,000, 9:45 p.m. Authorization, device signature, Evan Walker. Routed to Carter Holdings LLC. I wrote each line like a log entry, precise, unemotional. Old habits. Old discipline, June 7th, wire transfer $50,000, 10:12 p.m. Authorization, same. Memo, vehicle purchase, June 14th, $25,000, 10:30 p.m. June 29th, $75,000, 11:10 p.m. Final transfer. Memo, Mercedes-Benz S-Class. Premier Motors, Glendale. Total, $200,000. I listed names. Daniel Carter, Carter Holdings LLC, Premier Motors, Glendale. Timestamps, IP addresses from the bank logs. Device signatures. The little technical notations felt like flares on a dark sea, each one pointing to a man I loved and the man he'd become. The act of writing steadied me. It turned rage into record. It kept me from making a mistake born of fury. I thought of taking the file to the police, of letting the law handle it. But then I pictured Evan in a holding cell and something colder than grief settled in my chest. No, not yet. I wanted him to face something. The police couldn't give him truth, public truth, eyes on him from the very world he'd used to prove himself. I wanted the Carters to know the methods their connections inspired. I wanted the neighbors, the ones who'd waved when I mowed the lawn, who'd brought casseroles after Laura's funeral, to see the man their boy had become. I wanted Evan to stand in the light and have his choices revealed, not hidden behind legalese and plea bargains. So I wrote until the list was complete, until the paper looked like a ledger and the pen felt like a compass needle. When I finished, I stacked the pages and slid them into an envelope. I didn't seal it. I put it on the kitchen table where it would wait like an invitation. Outside, a late car passed, its headlights painting a quick, indifferent stripe across the window. I listened to the night, the distant bay, the faint call of a gull, the soft murmur of a neighbor's television through the thin air. I thought of the boy with the grease-stained hands, the one who'd once given me a wrench set as a gift. I thought of the man who'd traded that memory for a smile from a man who wore cufflinks like medals. The folder on the table felt heavier than its pages. It carried not just numbers, but the shape of a choice. I turned off the light, but left the kitchen window uncovered. Some reckonings, I decided, are better served in daylight. The next morning, I returned to the bank. The same sunlight slanted through the blinds, the same scent of polish and paper. Only this time I wasn't confused. I was armed. Linda Cooper, the senior accounts officer, greeted me in her office, mid-40s, sharp eyes behind soft manners. She had the calm precision of someone who had seen every kind of financial mess imaginable. "Captain Walker," she said, motioning to the chair. "You mentioned you wanted a full audit trail?" "Yes," I replied. "Everything that ties those withdrawals to my son's device." She nodded, typing quickly. The printer hummed again, spitting out pages that felt more like evidence than bank records. We went through them line by line, time-stamped logins, authorization keys, device IDs. Then came the confirmation log, a recorded call placed from Evan's phone number, verifying the second transfer. His voice, calm, polite, unmistakable. Linda adjusted her glasses. "You could press charges," she said quietly. "This is clear fraud." I looked down at the papers, the black and white truth of my son's betrayal. "Not yet," I said. "There's more to fix than money." She studied me for a moment, maybe expecting anger or grief or the kind of despair she saw too often when family and finance collided. Instead, she saw calm, naval calm. I thanked her and left. 2 weeks later, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox. Thick, embossed, expensive, the kind you don't throw away without feeling its weight. You are cordially invited to the Carter Family Annual Gala, celebrating Daniel Carter's birthday and business expansion. The irony was surgical. The invitation shimmered faintly in my hand, embossed letters catching the light. I read it twice before setting it on the counter beside my coffee mug. Laura's voice echoed in my head, the one she used when I hesitated to act. Sometimes, Henry, silence isn't dignity. It's permission, so I went, not as a guest, not as a father, but as a witness. The Carter estate sat on the hill like it owned the skyline. The driveway was lined with imported cars, the air thick with the smell of cigar smoke and lavender candles. Music floated from the ballroom, a jazz band too polished to have soul. Inside, the world glittered. Crystal chandeliers, silk gowns, laughter that bounced off marble walls. Waiters moved like clockwork, glasses chiming in a rhythm that felt choreographed. I stayed near the edge of the room, unnoticed. I wore a simple dark suit, navy cut, sharp lines, clean shoes. The kind of outfit that doesn't announce itself but doesn't apologize either. Then I saw it. Parked right outside the glass doors, under spotlights and banners, the Mercedes-Benz S-Class. Silver body gleaming, Daniel Carter's initials etched onto the license plate. A velvet rope surrounded it like it was a relic, and beside it, champagne in hand, was Daniel himself, laughter echoing like gunfire through the room. Evan stood beside him, smiling, slightly stiff, eyes darting occasionally toward Olivia. Daniel raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice amplified through hidden speakers. "Tonight, I want to honor not just another successful year, but the people who make it worth celebrating." Polite applause. He continued, grinning wide enough to show every expensive tooth. "My son-in-law, Evan Walker, a man of real generosity, and the kind of respect I thought the younger generation had forgotten." The applause grew louder. Cameras flashed. Olivia beamed. Evan's smile faltered. Just for a second, I felt the burn of humiliation crawl up my spine, but also something else, a strange, quiet calm. The kind that comes right before a storm when you can feel the wind waiting to turn. Because the truth was ready. I left before dessert. The next morning, I sat across from Richard Barnes, the lawyer Linda Cooper had recommended. His office overlooked the bay, minimalist decor, leather chair, books lined in precise order. A man who liked clarity. He read through the file slowly, eyes narrowing as he turned each page. "You've documented this exceptionally well," he said finally. "Timestamps, IP data, even a phone verification log. Frankly, you've built the case for me." "I didn't build it for you," I said. "I built it to know exactly what I was dealing with." He nodded. "Understood. So what outcome are you hoping for? Restitution? Criminal charges?" I looked out the window. The sea beyond it was calm, flat, too still for comfort. "Justice," I said, "but not the kind that ruins him. The kind that teaches him." Barnes leaned back. "You're a father." "That's clear, but there are legal limits to mercy. If you wish, I can prepare an asset recovery motion. We could retrieve the funds within 60 days, possibly faster." I didn't answer. He tapped the folder again. "Or," I turned to him, "or you could redirect these assets, legally, through estate restructuring. Essentially, you protect what remains, your home, savings, pension, under a trust or limited access arrangement. Your son would have no legal control over anything you own. Not now, not later. It's irreversible, meaning, he said, folding his hands, that he'll never touch your assets again. You can turn his betrayal into a safeguard for your future. You'd make sure no one, not him, not his wife, not his in-laws, can exploit you financially again. Ever." I studied him. "Would he know?" "Eventually," Barnes said. "When you're gone. The trust activates immediately but reveals its clauses only when necessary. For now, he'll assume things remain as they were. It was an elegant kind of justice. Quiet, absolute, without spectacle. The kind the world doesn't applaud but history respects. What about restitution? I asked. You'll recover most of it, he said. Your son's joint account still holds traceable residuals. Carter Holdings LLC has open audits pending. We can tie the funds directly to your withdrawals. With the right legal framing, you'll be made whole. But your son won't see a dollar of your estate afterward. That's poetic symmetry, if you ask me. Poetic symmetry. I thought about that phrase all the way home. That night, I sat at my desk again. The house was quiet, the air thick with salt from the bay. I took out Laura's photo, her smile steady, her eyes the kind that saw both the storm and the calm it promised. Laura, I murmured, I'm doing what you'd do. Protecting what's left. Then I picked up the pen. The documents were simple. Trust establishment form, asset transfer agreement, retirement reallocation directive. All neat, emotionless titles that hid the ache of a father drawing a boundary. I read each line carefully. The legal language was dense, but I understood the essence. You are no longer vulnerable. He is no longer entitled. I signed, quietly, deliberately. When I placed the final signature, I felt a strange weight lift. Not relief, but resolve. A man can't rebuild what's been stolen, but he can fortify what's left. I closed the folder and set my pen down. The ink stain on my thumb looked like a small bruise. Fitting. The clock read 11:47 p.m. Outside, waves rolled softly against the rocks. I could almost hear the Navy ship engines from years ago. Steady. Sure, unyielding. Before turning off the lamp, I whispered into the dark. He wanted to learn business from Daniel Carter. Fine. Let him learn consequence from me. A week later, I invited them for dinner. Evan, Olivia, and Daniel Carter. I set the table myself. Nothing fancy. Roast chicken, potatoes, the same chipped plates Laura and I had used for years. I wanted the room to smell like home, not hospitality. The lamp over the dining table hummed faintly, casting soft light across the folder waiting near my elbow. The label read, Walker Estate, Legal Amendments. By the time the doorbell rang, I already knew how the evening would go. The Mercedes pulled into my driveway again, headlights cutting across the quiet street like a blade. The car gleamed, polished silver arrogance parked beside my modest Ford. When the door opened, Daniel Carter stepped in first, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. Olivia followed, her smile nervous, eyes darting to Evan, who trailed behind her with his hands in his pockets. Daniel spread his arms. Henry, I can't thank you enough for raising such a fine young man. I smiled thinly. Oh, I wouldn't be too sure of that yet, he laughed. The deep, performative kind. Olivia gave a small, confused chuckle. Evan glanced at me, unsure, already uneasy. We sat. The room was quiet except for the clinking of silverware and the faint sound of crickets outside. The food cooled faster than it should have. When the coffee was poured, I let the silence stretch, long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then I placed the folder on the table. It landed softly, but the sound carried more weight than any word I could have spoken. Evan blinked. What's this? I met his eyes. Proof. Every transfer, every forged authorization. And the legal changes that follow. The color drained slightly from his face. Daniel's smile faltered for the first time that night. Olivia looked at her husband, confusion tightening her brow. Dad, we talked about this. Evan started. I raised a hand. No, Evan, you talked. I listened. Now you'll listen. My voice stayed calm. Even though my chest ached with the effort. You took the money I saved after your mother died. Money meant for my final years. And you handed it to a man who never needed it. You called it respect. I call it betrayal. Olivia's fork slipped from her hand, clattering against the plate. She looked from me to Evan, as if searching for a version of the story that wouldn't cut. Daniel cleared his throat. Henry, I had no idea. I turned to him slowly. No, Daniel. You just accepted the flattery. And the car. His lips parted, but no sound came. I slid another page across the table. The letterhead bore his dealership's name, Premier Motors, Glendale, and the revocation notice stamped in bold. I've reclaimed every cent through legal recourse, I said. The Mercedes title has been revoked. Payment reversed. Your dealership has been contacted. They'll be expecting the car's return by Friday. Daniel's face stiffened, his confidence dissolving. You went to my business? Yes, I interrupted. Where your business accepted stolen funds as a purchase. You'll refund the amount to the issuing account. Under court supervision. Olivia gasped softly, hands over her mouth. Evan looked like he'd been punched. You embarrassed me, he shouted suddenly. Do you have any idea what this looks like? It looks like the truth, I said quietly. And the truth doesn't care about appearances. He stood pacing, running a hand through his hair. Do you know how this makes me look to them? To everyone! Yes, I said. It makes you look human again. The air thickened, the way it does before a storm. The ticking clock behind me filled the silence between breaths. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Evan, tell me this isn't true. He didn't answer. Evan, she said again, louder now, her voice trembling. He sank into the chair, shoulders folding inward. I thought I was doing something right, he whispered. I just wanted them to see me as successful. I looked at him for a long moment. The boy who once fixed a bike with greasy hands now sat in front of me wearing guilt like a uniform he didn't know how to remove. Then start earning it, I said softly. Without taking what isn't yours. Daniel pushed his chair back abruptly. I don't appreciate being dragged into a domestic issue. Henry, this could have been handled privately. This stopped being private when you accepted a stolen gift and toasted it under spotlights, I replied. He stiffened. Watch your tone, I met his gaze steadily. I've commanded men twice your size in seas rougher than your conscience, Daniel. Don't tell me about tone. He opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. Olivia stood quickly. I need air, she said, voice breaking. She walked out to the porch, shoulders trembling. For a moment, no one spoke. Evan stared at the table, jaw tight, eyes glossy. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks, a pointless gesture of control, then muttered, This is ridiculous, and stormed out after Olivia, muttering something about calling his lawyer. The door clicked shut. Only Evan and I remained. He didn't look at me. The sound of his breathing filled the small space. I took a sip of coffee. Cold now. Bitter. Do you know the worst part, son? He shook his head slowly. It's not the money, I said. It's the ease. The way you did it without hesitation. The way you justified it to yourself. That's what hurts, his voice cracked. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't think about me at all, I said quietly. You thought about impressing a man who couldn't tell integrity from image. He pressed his palms to his eyes. I just wanted to belong somewhere better, I sighed. Better doesn't mean richer, Evan. It means cleaner. You mixed the two and called it success. He looked up, finally, tears breaking through the composure. I'll fix it. You can't, I said. Not with money. You can only fix it with time. He nodded, barely, the kind of nod that comes when words run out. You've lost my trust, I said, my voice even. But you haven't lost your chance to rebuild it. That's harder than buying a car. He didn't move. Just sat there, silent, the way sailors sit through storms because they have nowhere else to go. After a while, he stood, eyes red, voice small. What do I do now? I folded the documents back into the folder, aligning the edges carefully. You start by returning the car yourself. Not Daniel. Not a courier. You. You walk into that dealership and hand them the keys, and then you look that salesman in the eye and tell him why. He looked down at his hands, trembling slightly, the same hands that once built models beside me. He'll know. Yes, I said. He should. When he left, the air felt lighter but lonelier. The Mercedes engine started outside. The same purr that once symbolized triumph now sounded like confession. I watched from the window as the taillights disappeared around the corner. Later that night, I sat alone at the same table, the coffee replaced by a glass of water. The folder rested beside me again, but this time it wasn't proof. It was closure. Laura's photo sat across from me. I could almost hear her voice, soft, calm, proud. You handled it your way, Henry. I smiled faintly. Maybe, though I wish I'd never had to. The clock ticked past midnight. The street outside was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted, not in the house, but in me. I didn't feel vengeance. Just peace, the kind earned by standing firm when every instinct wants to break. The next morning, a text came from Evan. Returned the car. I told them everything. I'm sorry, Dad, no excuses. No explanations. Just that. I looked at the message for a long time before replying. Good. That's the first right thing you've done in a long time. Keep going. Then I set the phone down and opened the blinds. The sunrise spilled across the room, warm and clean, like forgiveness waiting in the distance, still far, but visible. The fallout didn't arrive in a storm. It came like slow rain, steady and unrelenting. Within weeks, Daniel Carter's name began circulating through business columns and local whispers. Someone at Premier Motors leaked that the Mercedes purchase had been revoked under a fraudulent payment inquiry. His company, Carter Holdings, launched an internal audit. That was the polite way of saying they were hunting for proof of rot under the gold plating. Daniel tried to call me once, left a voicemail that began with, "Henry, surely we can discuss this like gentlemen," and ended with silence after 30 seconds of hesitation. I never called back. The car was repossessed quietly. One morning, a tow truck eased into his gated driveway and rolled the gleaming Mercedes away. There were no cameras, no statements. Just the slow sound of something expensive leaving in defeat. Evan left his job at Daniel's firm soon after. He told me over the phone, voice low, heavy with something close to relief. "Couldn't walk through those doors anymore, Dad. Everyone knew." "Then don't," I said. "Start clean." Olivia went back to teaching at a local middle school. Her emails became softer, more sincere. Once she wrote, "I see now what you meant, about what kind of success lasts." I didn't reply, but I read it twice. Evan started sending me small checks. Not much. 200 here, 300 there, labeled repayment. I told him not to more than once. "Keep it," I'd said. "You need it." He shook his head. "No, Dad, I need to do this." I let him. Not for the money, I didn't need it. But I needed to see if he still remembered what responsibility looked like when it wasn't comfortable. Month by month, his balance crept back toward even. And with each envelope, my anger dulled, replaced by something closer to sadness, the quiet kind that sits beside you instead of stabbing you. One evening, Richard Barnes called. I was sitting on the porch, the smell of salt and cut grass in the air, when the phone buzzed. "Captain Walker," he said. "Good news. Your estate's completely secure now. The trust is finalized. No one can access your funds without your physical authorization and biometric signature." I leaned back in the chair. "That's all I wanted, Richard." "Peace of mind," he chuckled. "I'd call that a victory." "Not a victory," I said softly. "Just balance." We ended the call, and I sat there watching the last bit of daylight fade into the bay. The gulls wheeled low over the water, their cries thin but free. In the months that followed, I found my rhythm again, quieter, slower, steadier. I started volunteering at the community workshop, a small place tucked behind the old Naval Museum. The benches smelled of sawdust and oil, the air filled with the low hum of soldering irons and curious chatter. The apprentices were young, 18, maybe 20, their hands unsure, their questions endless. I taught them wiring, circuit logic, safety basics. "Electricity's like character," I told them one afternoon. "You can't always see where it's going, but you sure as hell feel it when it goes wrong." They laughed. And one of the boys, Luis, a kid with grease permanently under his nails, said, "Guess that means don't fake the current, huh?" "Exactly," I said. They didn't know the whole story behind that line, but maybe they didn't need to. Teaching them steadied me in ways I hadn't expected. Watching their focus, their small triumphs when a light finally blinked on, I realized I wasn't just fixing circuits. I was rewiring something in myself. Faith, maybe. The belief that discipline still mattered, that trust could still be built, slowly, solder joint by solder joint. Evan started coming by on weekends. No announcements, no ceremony, just the sound of his old car pulling into the driveway around noon. He'd bring takeout sometimes, or coffee from the diner his mother used to love. The first few visits were awkward. We'd talk about work, the weather, Anything but what mattered. Then, one Saturday, as we replaced the wiring on the porch light together, he broke the silence. "You ever think we'll get back to normal?" he asked. I tightened a screw before answering. "Normal's overrated. We'll get to honest." "That's better." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I'm sorry," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I know." We worked in silence after that. The sound of the screwdriver clicking into place, echoing like punctuation at the end of a long confession. A few days later, Olivia dropped by. She stood at the doorway with a plate of lemon cake, Laura's recipe somehow remembered. "She used to bring this to PTA meetings," she said softly. I smiled. "She did. Said sugar solved what apologies couldn't." Olivia's eyes watered. "I'm trying to fix things too." "I know," I said gently. "And you're welcome here." For a moment she just stood there, then nodded, leaving the plate on the table before walking back toward the car. Evan waited for her outside. He didn't look up at the window, but I saw the way his hand found hers. Cautious. Real. Life has a way of quieting after storms, not because everything's repaired, but because what's left is finally true. By autumn, the workshop got a small grant, and I found myself supervising a new group of apprentices. One of them asked about my Navy days, about the hardest lesson I'd ever learned. I thought for a long moment before answering. That sometimes the ones you'd take a bullet for are the ones who'll hand you the gun, I said. "But if you're lucky, they learn not to pull the trigger." He frowned, then smiled faintly. "That's dark, sir." "Truth usually is," I replied, then clapped him on the shoulder. "Now let's get back to work." That night, I locked the workshop, walked home under the streetlights, and stopped at the bay. The water was calm, black glass reflecting the stars. I could almost hear Laura's voice again, steady and sure. "You did what was right, Henry, even if it hurt." I smiled faintly. "Yeah," I whispered, "but it's a good kind of hurt." The breeze smelled of salt and old wood. Somewhere in the distance, a bell buoy rang, steady, constant. I turned for home, hands in my pockets, the faint hum of electricity from a nearby pole running through the quiet. The world was still wired, still connected, still alive. And so was I. 6 months later, the mornings had become gentler, the kind that begin in silence and don't demand anything of you. Early light spilled across my workbench, painting gold lines over the scattered tools, pliers, wire cutters, and my old Navy wrench, worn smooth from years of use. The smell of oil, metal, and rain drifted in from the cracked window. Outside, the bay murmured against the rocks, calm for once. I was sorting through a box of donated parts for the workshop when I heard footsteps. Slow, familiar. Evan stood in the doorway, shoulders slightly hunched, holding 2 paper cups and a worn envelope. His hair was shorter, his eyes clearer, though lined with something I hadn't seen before. Humility. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," I replied, not looking up right away. "You're early," he smiled faintly. "Old habits. Mom used to say you were always up before the sun." She wasn't wrong. He placed 1 cup near my elbow, the steam curling between us. Then he set the envelope on the table, gently, like it carried more weight than it should. "Dad," he said, his voice low, careful. "Last payment. The last of what I owe you." I stared at the envelope for a long moment. The edges were creased, his name written in small, uncertain letters. I could see the effort it represented, not in the money, but in the act. "Keep it," I said finally. "Use it to start over. Just don't buy anyone's approval again." He looked at me, eyes wet. "I don't deserve forgiveness." I took a sip of the coffee, lukewarm, bitter, grounding. "Forgiveness isn't deserved," I said softly. "It's chosen." For a moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the old heater and the ticking of the clock above the workbench. Evan nodded slowly, staring at his hands. "I still think about what I did." "Every day." "Good," I said. "That means you remember the lesson." He gave a small, broken laugh. "You and your lessons." "Someone had to keep teaching," I said. We sat like that for a while. Two men sharing silence that no longer hurt. The kind that carried understanding, not tension. Outside, a car engine started. Not a Mercedes this time, just the low, uneven hum of Evan's old used sedan. The sound made me smile. He stood, picking up his coat. "You still working with those kids at the workshop?" "Every week," I said. "They listen better than most adults I know." "I bet," he said, smiling a little. "Maybe one day I'll stop by. Help out." "You'd be welcome," I said, meaning it. He hesitated near the door, hand resting on the frame. "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me." I met his eyes. "That's not how fathers work." He nodded, swallowed hard, and left quietly. The garage door creaked shut behind him. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the faint rhythm of rain against the window pane. The air smelled clean, metal, oil, and salt. The kind of smell that belongs to fresh starts. I looked at the envelope still sitting on the table. The paper had absorbed a faint ring of coffee. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached for my old wrench, the one I'd used to teach Evan how to fix his first bike. The handle fit perfectly in my hand, familiar and heavy. I ran a thumb along the groove near the head, where the metal had darkened over time. "You can't repair trust the same way you fix a wire," I murmured to myself. "But you can still reconnect what's left." Somewhere outside, I heard his car pulling away. Not fast, just steady. I stood, turned off the lamp, and let the morning light fill the space again. Laura's photo hung on the wall above the workbench, her smile as quiet and knowing as ever. I looked at her and whispered, "He's learning." And in that moment, I realized I was too. I opened the door to let the air move through the room. It smelled of rain, of metal, of something ending and beginning at once. Sometimes the quietest victories are the loudest truths.